Let's have a look at the other end of the financial services spectrum. Now we go from the, not the bottom, but certainly close to the bottom to close to the top. It's wealth management. There's a whole new breed of people who have wealth. What are their needs? In the studio with me now is Eddy Oblowitz, the chairman of Stonehage. I get the impression that the wealth management business is booming, and I get the impression, just like Mark was saying about the sophistication of our financial services industries and regulators, that we're quite sophisticated in managing wealth in this country.
Yes, we are, Lindsay, and obviously post for the last 20 years we've had new entrants into that high net worth, ultra high net worth space, which is very different in terms of first generational wealth, and that's fairly unique to South Africa and to emerging countries, as opposed to the more developed countries where there's more, let's call it, old money. Yes. And that, in course, produces, those new entrants produce new dynamics and new demands.
Eddy, looking at your release today, you do mention that succession planning is probably the key to managing this new money. Maybe if you can walk us through that process. Okay, so,
there have been quite a few studies that have shown that within 3 generations, wealth dissipates, immense wealth dissipates. And that at the root is through lack of succession planning. And succession planning often is overlooked when you look at what risks, the perception amongst risks with families. They will generally deal with the traditional risks of returns of investments, geographic spread, currency spread, etc., regulatory involvement, compliance. But very few families actually look at the real risk, which is oftentimes the family themselves. And in as much as little as 7% in terms of a family office exchange survey, only 7% ascribe family dynamics and lack of communication amongst the generations and adequate succession planning as a true risk. So succession planning doesn't start and stop. It's an ongoing journey. It's got to be renewed and re-energized with each successive generation. And of course, with first generation wealth, you don't have that luxury of being able to either emulate or to tweak a former plan. It's all, if I can call it, virgin turf, having to be done for the first time. So that is very much a new for new kids on the block, so to speak, a very top of the agenda item.
Robin, I guess there's maturity here, because a lot of family squabbles seem to erupt over the reading of the will. And so when you talk about succession planning, it's bringing the family together. Of course, the question is, which part of the family? And I think getting people to understand that this is a process that will actually go through multi-generational and not necessarily go from the actual first generation that created it and through to the second, where it'll be subsequently squandered, probably.
Correct, and it's not about the will only. The will is actually a byproduct. A will is a byproduct of family dynamics, of communication, it's of asset structures, it's of geographic spread. And families need to take stock that it's not about capital only in the dollars and cents of financial capital, but really there are 2 other forms of capital. There's human capital in terms of the individual family members, and there's intellectual capital, what the family members have done in terms of proving themselves. And it's all those components that go into succession planning that makes it a complex, iterative exercise. As I said, it needs to be re-energized with each successive generation. One can't sit in a vacuum and plan for every eventuality that may befall a family. And let's face facts, things change within families, people move, people change, and therefore the plan needs to change and be responsive to those changes.
And you have to change as well as an industry, because the sort of people that are knocking on your door these days are not the sort of people that 25 years ago would have been doing so, or 75 years ago. I mean, characterise new wealth in South Africa. Is it an emerging black, middle and upper class in wealth terms? Is it women, single women coming in with their own money because of their success? How has it changed?
It's all that, Lindsay. Traditionally, 75% of wealthy people inherited the money. Now it's the opposite. So in South Africa, as I alluded to, in terms of first generational wealth, in terms of the last 20 years, especially as new entrants, They don't have the luxury of having prior planning, as I mentioned. You've got individuality in terms of people pursuing careers. So very much so, it's not only the old money. And as I said, that creates new demands. That creates a lot of planning. And when we've seen, in terms of new wealth, often the banks have thrown money in terms of black empowerment deals, in terms of lending money. But there's been very little education in the broader sense of providing what the next generation needs to do. And next generation, proper wealth in terms of the ultra-high net worth space, with that comes awesome responsibility. It's not about the now only, it's about how to retain that money beyond the now. And it's as difficult as it may be to make money, it's even more difficult to retain it and grow it.
Gugu, I'm just going to have one more quick question here before you come in. Who are the easier clients to deal with, the new money people or the old money people? Just a quick answer.
Is there such a thing as an easy client? They're all different. I cannot say it's easier one way or the other because the dynamics are different. And there's no cookie-cutter approach, Lindsay. Each individual family needs to be assessed because the dynamics are different. The regulatory and the structuring part, generally, as complex as it may sound, is the easier bit. In our business, the piece de resistance is getting to know the family.
Get to know the family. Gugu, I'm sorry I interrupted there, but I couldn't resist that one. Sorry, back to you.
No worries at all, Lindsay. At least we got the answer that their clients are difficult across the board, potentially. But Eddy, out of interest, now that the market or the demand for this kind of wealth management has grown bigger, are you finding that yourself and your peers in the industry are having to fight off competition to attract these clients? And what about the fees perspective involved?
Sorry, it was rather muffled. Can you just repeat the last part?
We're talking about the fee, the competition within the wealth management industry and also the fee structure. Are your fees coming down? Is fees something that the prospective client will look at?
Fees are always very important in every service provider, but we're not in a project management type of business. We're not in just for the now, as I mentioned previously. So fees have got to be viewed in terms of the value add that we are providing along the generations. And in our particular firm, we've been providing families now over 4 decades. So we're now on the 3rd generation of some of those same families. So you need to see fees not in necessarily comparing one or the other, because you can't compare apples with oranges. It's about getting to know the family. It's about being custodians of the innermost secrets. And how do you attach necessarily an hourly rate only to that? There's a value add context in being able to be at the top table with the family and providing them with services which maybe they not be able to get from somebody else because of your deep-seated knowledge of that particular family.
It's a strange thing, isn't it, Eddy? We've got growth bowling along at a miserable 1.3, 1.4%, and yet the wealth management industry is booming because there is a sector of the community that is doing very well, whether it be old or new money. That's Eddy Oblowitz. Thanks so much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much.
He's the chairman of Stonehage.